How you doing today? My name is Lynn David Livesey, and I'm your full spectrum Gnostic. And we have a very good show for you today. This is Knowledge from Beyond. And uh, what are we talking about today? We're still heading towards Halloween, and we have a lot of scary topics heading into Halloween. We're talking today Frankenstein, fact or for fiction. And this might be a little gory. So if you're not into gore, maybe you want to skip this one. But this is very, very fascinating. And we're looking into details of, Mary Shelley wrote her book in 1818. And we're going into where did she get the knowledge to write her book from? Did she just make this up out of thin air? Did she know something that was going on? So, as we normally do here, we always like to go back to the beginning. So, how far back are we going to go? Okay. Are we going back to the Anunnaki? Are we going back to the Garden of Eden? Are we going back to the Bible? No, we're not even going that far back. We're going. Let's keep up with our slideshow. So let's go to the next slide, and you'll see where we're going. We're going to. Let's see here. We're going to. That is Frankenstein. What Frankenstein was, Mary Shelley. For those who don't know about Frankenstein, how can you not know about Frankenstein? Frankenstein is a fictional story about this lady that wrote this story about they took this person, pieced him together from the cemetery, and they used electricity to bring him back to life. And to his creator, he was his beautiful creation. To everyone else, he was the monster. Okay. And it probably didn't have a happy ending, as you can imagine. But what we're looking into is this possible, and where did she get this information from? Okay, so let's go ahead and go to our next slide. Now, we didn't know nothing. People have been like me, and you have been here for thousands of years. We didn't know nothing about the human body. Only thing we knew is that people died, and a lot of it was thought about and being ghosts and spirits and everything like that. It is not until the first autopsy wasn't done until the 1100s, where they started to monkey around, and they started to see that people had different parts of the body, and they tried to start understanding these pieces of all the parts of the body. And they was coming with the idea that there's something called diseases, and what was causing people to die is malfunctions of pieces of body that you actually had. Okay. And this is kind of gory. Like what they would do back in the old days, if they would actually take a piece of your liver and actually taste it, or taste a piece of your heart and they could tell if it was a bitter taste, then something was wrong with it. We don't do that today. Okay. But this was the first understanding that your body was made of parts, and the malfunction of these parts is what was causing people to die. Okay. Not ghosts and spirits. Then the next giant thing came about in 1507. That is when we finally figured out about anatomy. And this is when the craziness started in 1507. Is that now that they knew that there was different parts of the body, and these different parts of the body is what was causing death, they thought the thing that, okay, so if you had a person who had a bad heart, why can't you just cut out the old heart and put in a new one? If you had a bad liver, why can't you just cut out a bad one and put in a new one? And this is what started this crave throughout the 15 and 1600s of digging up bodies and trying to piece them back together again, because you would cut out the bad parts and try to replace them with better parts. They didn't understand the complication of that. They didn't understand about the complication of open heart surgery and the whole 9 yards. They just thought that if you just took a bad heart and replaced it with a young person's heart and stitched the person back together, you could, once you reanimated the person, and we're talking about something called reanimation, is what Frankenstein was all about. And that is what it is called today. What they're trying to reanimate people. Okay. Now, and this is the study of this and trying to see what would happen. And they was doing a lot of experiments on animals, that if they took a piece of one dog, especially they was using dogs and things like that, and take the liver from one dog and put it into another. And if you had a diseased dog and switch it out, and this was kind of crazy. Okay, so let's go to our next slide. Now, this is what they was trying to do. They didn't have, as you can see, nobody's wearing gloves, nobody's doing anything. They just would get cadavers or dead people, and they would started to cut them up and trying to figure out how the body worked. And this was, a lot of that was done, they just didn't have the basic of anything. Okay. We think, even though we have been around for 100,000 years, it was not just it was only a few 100 years ago that we tried to figure out how people, the human body functioned. Okay. And this took a very long time. And since they had to, play with people, a lot of times they used enemy soldiers or people of this, or when a person would die, they would try to figure out what was wrong with them. Okay. But this took a very, very, very long time. And then something happened. With all of this, they ran into this in 1679. Let me blow this up so you can see this. In 1679, a person did autopsies on 3,000 bodies, and they actually figured out how the body functioned and everything like this, and the causes of diseases. So they was going through a lot of bodies, and what a lot of these people was doing is they was digging up people from the cemeteries. Okay. And to the locals, this was very disturbing, because you would put your loved ones in the ground in the cemetery, and these shady people, they would pay people, because they wanted healthy specimens. So if they didn't want a very old person who died, if a young person died for whatever reason, they would have the funeral, and then a few days later, they would pay these scrupulous people to go and dig people up, and they would do their little experiments with them. But a lot of this was done under the table. It was very shady work. It was done. They didn't have any scientific procedures as we did today. This was all craziness. Okay. And unfortunately, a lot of this crazy stuff is still going on. You have these scientists that are working on this stuff. And at the same time, with the discovery of electricity, they discovered that they thought that was the secret of bringing a person back to life, was electricity. Because they thought electricity, they figured out that there was a difference between a dead person and a live person. And how do you go from inorganic matter to organic matter? What makes the difference between a live person and a dead person? Okay, what's the difference between a person in a coma and a person who's alive? This took them a very long time to figure out. Okay. So they kept needing bodies. So England in 1751, England passed the Murder Act. So if you was being executed, this gave them a way to get bodies, instead of dealing with these crazy people that was digging up bodies all the time. Okay. But you could only get so, they were executing some people, but the market was still not enough people, and they were still trying to figure out how all of this worked. Okay. And in places like England and London, they had schools. But in places like Eastern Europe or, in Russia and whatever, you just had people that was doing this stuff. It was all kind of stuff that was going on. And people had all these rumors of people trying to bring people back alive, or people doing necromancy, or working with spirits to try to do all of this. And all of this was scaring the local population. Okay. So, but the reason why the government got involved, because they were starting to see the potential of, because medical science, they still wasn't into modern science yet, but modern science was slowly evolving. Okay. And they saw the promise of being able to treat diseases if they could just figure out how things were, instead of the thing of switching out parts and everything like this. But this took them a very, very, very long time. Okay. And if you research this on the internet, there's a lot of very, very gory stuff about people was doing with animals, with body parts, this and that, using prisoners, all kind of stuff. Let's go to our next slide. So this shows one of the big experiments that they've started to do with electricity. And we're going to stop our little slideshow here so we can talk about this for a while. With electricity, they discovered that you could get pieces of the body to move and twitch. And there was this, and this is this big thing, that electricity, they thought it was what the soul was made of. Today, we don't consider the soul being made of electricity. But that's what they was thinking, that electricity, since it was coming from the sky and whatever, maybe it was divine or whatever. And they thought by, that by electrocuting different parts, because a lot of this was done. They even had one where they had, they was using the heads of pigs and cows, and you could even get the eyes to open or the tongue to move or things like this. And this was fascinating. And they was trying to figure out how could they actually do this to try to bring a whole person back. This is why in the movie Frankenstein, since electricity was hard to do in those days, they had very, very crude batteries. In the movie, they just used a bolt of lightning. Okay. Because they didn't have the the power we have today. Electricity was very hard to come by, and they had their very crude batteries, but they was thinking that you needed very high voltages. Okay. So let's go to the next slide. Okay. So this gets us to the giant experiment. They've been doing things and working with body parts and working with animals for a very long time. And then something happened the same year. See, the lady that wrote Frankenstein was following all this work that was going on. And they was thinking about what they would be able to do in the future. So the same year her book came out, they did the giant experiment in London. The date is 1818. They took a guy who was a murderer. And after he was hung, they got his body and they put electrodes in the neck, and then put electrodes in several parts of the body. And they wired him up to do an experiment. And this was totally shocking to everybody what they found out. This is a picture of what the giant experiment was. They was able to get him to open his eyes, to move his hands, to twitch, to have different facial expressions. Several people fainted. People was calling this the work of the devil when it was written up in the paper. Uh, this really scared a lot of people because not only were they working with a dead murderer, but people thought that with time that they would be able to bring people back alive. And would this bring in the age of zombies? See, we think zombies is something that people just worry about today. No, this was a very big fear back there because they thought with the spark electricity, which is the spark of God in their eyes, that they would be able to bring people back. And there are all kind of writings through this time period. Some of this is believable, some of it is not, because a lot of these people in France and in England and it was writing because they was trying to get funding for their work. Okay, so they was writing about experiments that they was doing with dogs and whatever. They was, they would suffocate dogs and then they would bring them back alive. And in some of their writings, they was able to bring animals back alive, and they was able to stay alive for several days after they was dead for several days. Now, a lot of these experiments we believe today was not actually done the way it was written up, because a lot of these experiments that are written out, when they tried to duplicate them in front of people, people would call them in because, like for example, he's trying to get funding, so he's doing this, and then when we'll go to the court and he said, I'm able to do this and whatever, and I got this, and I'm able to do this, they would call him in. And when he would try to do his experiment, he could not duplicate his work. And a lot of this stuff was so gory that some of these people got ran out of town. Some of these people, their work was just so, oh my gosh. There was no rules. There was no regulations. There was no nothing. And this is what the book Frankenstein is about. It's just a guy in a castle, a scientist, doing his thing. He has his little aide that's going around digging up bodies. He's stitching bodies together, doing this and that, doing his little experiments. The people in the village is getting all upset over people missing from the cemetery. He's doing this and that, rumors about what he's doing. Okay. Igor sneaking around the cemeteries and doing things. Okay. But a lot of this was actually going on at the time because they needed people to work on. And even though now they didn't have to 100% sneak around the cemeteries because they could use executed prisoners was not always hard to come by. So this is the problem that they got into next. Since there was this big rush for bodies, you know what happened next. Okay. This is talking about what was going on in the 1820s. People in England and other places, since they needed healthy specimens, they was going around killing people. So if you was healthy and whatever, they was poisoning people, this and that, because they needed healthy specimens, strangling people. So they was getting these, bodies, and these bodies would turn up, and then the family would say like, hey, something happened to my daughter, something happened to my wife, something happened to my little boy. Okay. And since these people, a lot of them had big connections, it was very little bit you could do about it. Okay. But this was making a lot of people nervous. This was upsetting a lot of people, as you can imagine. This is why today they don't, even today, if you try to go to the cemetery and start digging and you're not allowed to do anything. That's supposed to be what is called hollow ground. You're supposed to let people rest in peace. You can't be doing all kind of crazy stuff. And you don't want people experimenting on your loved ones, right? And this is what the crazy stuff that was going on. And we're not talking 500 years. This is back in the 1820s now. We're moving forward in time. So, what they did to the cut down on all this craziness going on. Let's go to the next slide. In 1832, England passed the Autopsy Act that you could actually get, people could donate their body to science, this and that, and they made it where they could legally do this trade. They was trying to get rid of all the crazy people that was doing it. Okay, this way they could actually purchase bodies from people. If a person in your family died, or a person in your family died, they would offer, hey, you don't, we'll give you so many pounds or whatever for your dead body, for that dead body. And they was trying to clean things up. But this is very, very good. But all of this was done trying to not only advance scientists as a way of trying to cure diseases. A lot of this was seen by a lot of people, especially the rich. They was the one who was financing this work, because the rich people, the thing about death, let's stop this thing for a minute. The thing about death is not something that only haunts poor people. It haunts poor people, rich people, important people, non-important people. There's nothing you can do. And if you're a lord or a king or something like that, or a person of authority, I don't care how powerful you are, you're going to die. And this is why these experiments about prolonging life or trying to cure diseases was always being financed. Because the people with money was trying to figure out a way how to cheat death. This is still giant money today. Giant money. Because just like hundreds of years ago, the rich and the powerful don't want to die. And they're trying to figure out a way how to live beyond their normal lifespan. So let's continue. We're up now to the 1830s. Okay. So let's go to the next slide. So this is what people was afraid of. This was a big comic that was put in a lot of the papers, and people was trying to shut this work down, because they was afraid that if they perfected their work, just like people are afraid of zombies today, they was afraid of zombies back then. And they was afraid that the scientists of their day was attempting, that they was trying to bring people back from the grave. And they was going to be zombies that was going to, the people feared this. See, we think all this zombie stuff is just something of today, of watching too much TV. This is an illustration that was published in England back in the 1800s. And they wanted this work shut down. Okay. Because they believe, you see these demons over here, they thought that they was getting people, since they was working on a lot of, they was getting bodies from dead people or homeless people or people that was doing crimes a lot of time, that they was afraid of people being brought back alive. And this is very, we still have the same fear today. Okay. But scientists kept working on this work. Okay. Because as I said, it was being financed by the rich and the powerful. Okay. So let's go on to our next slide. So that is kind of a gory picture, though, right? Let's look at it one more time. This is very bad. Look at it. Okay. See, and the demons are over there laughing, saying, "Oops! Look, one of them are escaping." Okay, very bad. So we're all the way up now to the 1930s. They're still working on this work, and they started to not only they figured out something, and we're going to stop it for a minute. That in the 1930s they figured out not only electricity was a thing, but a thing of, because as soon as you die, something called rigor mortis starts to set in. So they started to do things with working with dogs again about removing the dead blood and putting in new blood, and then using electricity and using drugs for anti-clogging and whatever. And they was able to bring a dog head uh, back alive and they was working with pigs from the slaughterhouse. Some of this is really, really gory stuff that was going on in the 30s. Okay. Look, they revived 2 dogs. Okay. See, this work is still going on. They're still working on this. Next slide. Now, we think all this is going on in the rest. Then in the Soviet Union in the 1930s, they was doing it too. They was using body parts and using animals again, because at this time, because of the the revulsion of the public, they switched back to animals. They use animals, and then they switch to people. And when the public starts getting too upset, they switch back to animals again. But even with this in the Soviet Union, and there's videos of this where they have the heads of dogs that, the tongue is moving and the eye, and the head is just is sitting in a bucket, and the head is alive. This is some really gory stuff. Okay. And these experiments went on very far. So we're going to stop this right now, because after the 1930s, when we get into World War II, a lot of very bad things happen in those camps. All of that is classified. What the Nazis was doing, classified. You can't touch that. The Nazis, since they was going to kill people anyway, you might as well have a little fun. And the Nazis was running all kind of experiments with people, trying to figure out how many times can a leg be broken and reset. Can you change a person's skin color? Can you change a person's eye color? Can you do this or that? They was running experiments, all kind of gory stuff. And because of the records we discovered after World War II, several Nazi doctors was executed after the war for war crimes. Not all of them, though. A lot of this information is still classified to this day. And a lot of this information is set that's the reason after World War II, modern science, our understanding of the human body substantially jumped. Okay. Because of the knowledge and the experimentation, and the Germans documented everything. Okay. So not all these German doctors was executed. A lot of them, ended up going to the Soviet Union, coming to America, going to England, and they took this work they did and they improved on it. And this gets us into the modern science we have today. Like this thing about using electricity. This is still considered a modern part of our medicine today. No, we don't believe that electricity is the act of God. But if you have a heart attack and whatever, this is how they're able to bring people back today because of these experiments that was done. This is how we're able to do organ transplants today and all this other stuff out of all of this work that was done underneath the table. Okay. And there's still in the field of, as I said before, which is reanimation, there is still giant money in reanimation research about, the thing of trying to bring people back. That is still today giant money. And there's several corporations which are working on that project. Okay. And all of that is under seal. But who's financing that again? Again, you know who's doing it. It's the rich and the powerful. Because if you could find a way to maybe, you can only do a heart transplant so many times, this and that and everything else. Some people don't want to die. If you're a millionaire or a billionaire, you don't want to leave all your money and everything to your kids and whatever. Okay. Also, what Frankenstein also was trying to do, like it says in the Bible, it says in the Bible that man was made in God's image. If you read the book of Enki and everything, remember how after the old ones blasphemed against God and was destroyed, and they needed a new worker race, they started experimentation with a primitive primate creature on Earth. We talked about that several times. Okay, remember? So that's probably pretty gory too, because remember, they tried everything. This is where this picture comes from. Some of these experiments that the Anunnaki was doing, that we're doing, all this stuff is super, super bad. Okay. And this is why a lot of this stuff cannot be seen by the public. But this work is being very heavily financed by, you know who? Okay. So this hasn't stopped. Because some people one day believe that one day in the future, man will create man in his image. And according to the old books, the only thing that separates us from God is knowledge and everlasting life. And according to the old books, the gods only had extended life because they ate of the tree and drunk of the water. That's the reason why in the book of Enki, once they created the Alpha or the Adam, they would not let him partake. This is why in the Garden of Eden, they said, let's remove man from the garden, because if he eat from the tree, he will have everlasting life. So this life extension is not something that is just born upon you. It is something artificial. Okay. And this is why for hundreds of years, thousands of years, they was looking for the fountain of youth. Okay. Because we still believe that it is possible. And this is one thing we was talking about when I was talking about the chromosomes a few podcasts back. Uh, you know, is about, every time our chromosome splits, they get shorter. That's what causes us to age. We have a dual strand of chromosome. Now there's people being born with a third strand. And scientists is looking at this fourth strand of chromosome, and they believe that is that separates us from them. These creatures of long time ago, what we call the Anunnaki, the God, they had four-stranded DNA. And the strange thing about four-stranded DNA, which we didn't even know existed until probably a few years ago, we're doing heavy work on that, because the strange thing about four-stranded DNA, you never heard of four-stranded DNA? Boy, you need to research that. When four-stranded DNA splits, it splits perfectly. There is no split ends. That means if you got four-stranded DNA, do that mean you wouldn't age? That is what they're trying to find out. Okay. But this is some very gory, hardcore stuff. And the problem with creating things like with in Frankenstein, to the scientist, to the doctor, his creation was a masterpiece. To everyone in the village, it was a monster. Okay. A lot of people believe this is blasphemy. Okay. This is, it says in the Bible that, that once the Nephilims came down and they saw that the women of the earth was fair, they had sex with them, and giants was born. Okay. But if you go into the book of Enoch, it goes a lot further than that. And in the book of Jubilees, it goes into that. In both of those books, it says the same thing, that after the Nephilims sinned with women, then they proceeded to sin with fish, birds, reptiles, and mammals. What does that mean? There is no explanation. But that probably explain these things that are half insect, half man, which we call fairy, half man, half fish, which we call mermaids, half man, half, back in the Roman days, they had these things that was half horse and half man. See, a lot of this stuff, the Bible just called all these things one word: abominations. Okay. You get what I'm saying? Okay. And before the flood, it says in the Bible that God came and looked upon the earth and all life was contaminated. Only Noah was pure. Okay. What does that mean? Okay. Is all life on the earth contaminated now? Are we heading that way? Okay. So, back to our subject. So, Frankenstein. The subject of this is Frankenstein, fact or fiction. It is still being worked on. Now, we have already created artificial eggs and fertilized them outside of the womb. and where we have mixed different types of human and things together. By law, once it starts to divide, you must destroy it. That is officially. Unofficially, if you're out there way in the middle of nowhere, or you're in some lab in some foreign country no one goes about, when it starts dividing, do you destroy it or do you keep it? Okay. That is the problem. So let's go on. So we're talking about National Institute of Health. They're still working on this stuff. They've been able to reanimate brain sets of dead pigs. Sounds like zombie to me. Okay. See what I'm saying? And they're pumping artificial blood and things. And see, they're doing everything. Okay. They used slaughterhouse pigs, and they was able to bring them back to life after they was killed. They brought them back to life for up to 36 hours. So maybe what was written hundreds of years ago that we think today was just fiction, maybe they was able to do the same thing hundreds of years ago. Okay. And again, this is official. Now, what is somebody doing halfway around the world in some top secret, privately funded lab? This keeps going. This gets very scary. Okay. See, Halloween is not, not all monsters are fake. Oops, 2011. Oh my gosh. Is Reanimation Real? In 2011, a 46-year-old woman fell into a frozen pond and she was dead. It took them several hours to get her out of the pond. She was frozen in the pond face down. They got her out of the pond. They took her to the hospital. They was able to bring her back to life 5 hours after she was dead. This is the first documented case of reanimation. So, is that the only case? We don't know. So, for those who think this is a zombie or whatever, that's the lady here. And after several weeks in the hospital, she went home back to her husband and to her kids. And according to us, she lived a regular life. But she was dead. And scientists believe that in the future, they will be able to bring people back that's been dead who knows how long. Okay. Now, see, if you see this picture versus the other picture, it's not scary anymore. Okay. And we are doing all kind of things under what is called life extension and all kind of stuff that we believe today that in the near future, maybe 150, 100 years from now, that we will be able to extend life. $120, 150 years, 175 years. Now, what is keeping all these experiments at bay is that our body is a physical machine. So I don't care how many times you do things, since our body is mechanical, sooner or later, you're not going to be able to repair it. That's why we are getting to the end of the Frankenstein experiments. We're now believing that instead of keep going to to keep going to heart transplant after heart transplant and keep doing heart transplants, we're looking at going to prosthetic in the future, to where you will go to, instead of your real heart, if you have a heart attack in the future, they're going to give you a mechanical heart. They'll give you a mechanical liver. And slowly this is what humanism is all about. We're going to start replacing human parts with mechanical parts. And there's already some movies about that in the future, that in the future, man will be a mixture of human and machine. Okay. And then from there, it's not stopping there. Because they're working on what the best example of this is the fictional show Ghost in the Shell, where they talk about in the future in 2045, 2048, because of the high radiation level after World War III and World War IV. Okay. Uh, People have pure prosthetic bodies. And what you do is they just switch you. They put your brain in a brain case and they give you a prosthetic body so you can live with the high level of radiation and with the high level of pollution on the earth. Okay. So the only thing that is wearing out is your physical brain, which is in a brain case. And then at the end of the show, after that ran for several years, they were starting to get rid of brain cases. They was going to a cyber brain. Okay. And that made you a pure. Okay. Because then you had a cyber brain and a prosthetic body. Would you still be human after that? If you no longer had a human body, and they replace your body with a synthetic body, would you still be human? Okay. If you was Bill Gates and you substituted your body for a prosthetic body, how your kids, I guess there's no inheritance, right? But again, this is being done, all these experiments for hundreds of years are being financed by the same people. Because so many people do not understand that, see, we are a spectral living energy. Our goal is to go through every form of life, every type of creation, and to return to God as a splitting image of Him. This journey could take 1,000 years, 1,000,000 years, or 1,000,000 years. It doesn't make any difference, because to Him time do not exist. We have already went from the point of being living energy to being an insect, to being atomic life, and then molecular life, and then multicellular life, and then I guess insects, and then we was rodents, and then we already came all the way up from sub-animal to super animal man. We're supposed to keep advancing. Some people don't see death as the closing of one book and the opening of another book. Some people see death as being finite. So they want to stop that point. So, to put it in an analogy, let's say you love high school so much, you want to stop it to where you never graduate from high school. Because in high school, you're when you're the head jock, you got all these girls, you're super famous, this and that and whatever. But you got to graduate. You got to leave. You can't stay there forever. You can't stay on the football team forever. You have to let it go. You have to close that chapter and move forward. This is what people do not understand. Death is not finite. Death is the closing of of one chapter and opening of another. And it is not about the preservation of our physical body. What we're trying to do is the preservation of our personality. Our personality, what makes Lynn Livesey, Lynn David Livesey, Lynn David Livesey, is my unique personality, which is a snowflake. Okay. My physical body, my avatar can get damaged, it can die. But my personality, my spirit, my life force can survive death. I don't need to try to get this avatar to try to stay together to live forever. Okay. This is what this Frankenstein BS is all about. The belief that you have to keep your avatar, your physical body, living forever. We are spirit creatures living a physical existence because our spirit bodies are not functional yet. But once we leave and graduate from this level, we will go to the next level. The next level above us is we will evolve into becoming angels. Okay. And we will start the process working that direction. That is the reason it's called progression. Okay. See what I'm saying? You can't say, I'm tired of being a human. I want to go back to being a rabbit again, or I want to do this. No, progression, it's only one way. It's not like I'm tired of being an adult. I want to go back to high school. You can't. We have to progress. And this little craziness that we've been doing for hundreds of years, playing with animals, chopping people up and stitching them together, electrocuting people, trying to bring people back. Now we got all this reanimation fluids and all this stuff. And oh my gosh, this stuff is crazy. You can survive death. Death is not the end. So the question is Frankenstein fact or fiction? It is true that the goal of trying to cheat death, and we do it every day in our world, and we don't even think about it. When you fall over, they rush you to the hospital, and so many thousands of people has been brought back. Okay. But they can only do it so much. Maybe 100 years from now, you know, you get what I'm saying? A lot of people had 3, 4, 5 brushes with death, and they're still here. Some people have died on the table several times. They're still there. You're on something called borrowed time. But I don't care how much time you borrow, sooner or later, your time is up. We all came in this world with nothing, and we're leaving here with nothing. The point is, it's not important how much time you live, is what you do with your life. Because at the end of your life, one simple question is asked. God only gave you one thing: life. And at the end of your life, if you live 20 years, 30 years, 50 years, 100 years, 150 years, the same question is asked: what did you do with your life? Think about it. And it's not about how many, you know, how much stock I owned, or what was my credit score, or what was the square footage of the house I lived in, or that. None of this is important. There's only three things that is important: mental progression, spiritual progression, and emotional progression. That's if you are progressing. Okay. Some people are stagnant, and some people are moving backwards. But at the end of your life, you have to answer: what did you do with your life? Did you try to make your piece of the world a better place for you and your children and your prosperity? This is what is even in the Constitution. They talk about that's the goal, to try to make the world a better place. Today, we don't give a damn about our kids, about this and that. We just only care about who can collect the most toys. We are lost. We have lost our way. And in closing, the Bible says that in the end, it will be as it was in the days of Noah. And in the days of Noah, all life was contaminated. Is that what we're doing today? With all this crazy stuff we're doing today? Is all life on earth again becoming contaminated? I don't have the answer to that. Okay. But it's something that we all need to think about. My name is Len David Livesey. I'm your full spectrum Gnostic. Up going into Halloween, we're going to talk about different things with Halloween topics. But it's not just to talk about craziness or whatever. I'm trying to, because a lot of this stuff people talked about before, they was trying to rationalize things that they couldn't figure out. And what we call science fiction today used to be called futurists. Okay. They was trying to see what the future was going to be like. And the future is still up to us to decide. I hope you enjoyed this podcast. Share it with your friends. And I look forward to seeing everybody again very soon. My name is Len David Livesey. I'm on Facebook. I watch the other shows on the Spirit Room Network. Join my Facebook page. If you got anything you'd like to talk about, let me know. And with that, I'm out of here. Thank you so much. Happy Halloween.